If you clicked on this video, then chances are you're asking one simple question. What is the best gaming monitor for yourself? And there are so many different options to choose from, right? You've got ones that are big, ones that are small, cheap, expensive, HDR. Well, I don't really know what the opposite of HDR would be. You wouldn't be looking for low DR now, would you? Well, everybody, fear not, because in this video, we're going to find you the perfect gaming monitor specifically for you, and explain literally everything you need to know about the subject before handing out my very top picks at every single price point and budget. So get ready to have the hard work done for you right after a short word from this video's sponsor. Elgato's prompter has arrived, and it's here to revolutionize your workflow. This teleprompter transforms your videos, presentations and calls, all thanks to the fusion of a display, camera HUD and software suite. With this elegant, all-in-one solution, you can look professional and make your streams and recordings so much easier, all with a device that is extremely simple to set up and use. Learn more today with a link down below. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is a gaming monitor? Well, as the name suggests, it's a display that's specifically designed for gaming, with any gaming monitor that's worth its salt having a fast and responsive screen and a low level of input lag. A decade ago, this would have come at the expense of image quality, with washed out panels and terrible viewing angles, but these days you just don't have to pick between picture quality and performance. Let's break down the key things to look for, starting with refresh rate. Probably the key statistic to watch out for, the refresh rate tells you exactly how many times the images refresh per second. The more refresh cycles, the smoother the image will be and the lower the lag will be. But don't go thinking that this is some kind of silver bullet, because lag is made up of several different components, as we will discuss shortly, but at first glance it is your strongest indication of speed. Do keep in mind, of course, that these are the maximum refresh rates that these panels can work at, and crucially rely on your gaming PC or console to actually supply the frames per second that the monitor will need to work at its best. For example, a 165Hz monitor will only feel as smooth as a seal if you're outputting at 165 frames per second. Not that I'm a seal expert or anything, I just assume they're pretty smooth. The lesson here is to work out what exactly your gaming PC is capable of, and then buy something appropriate. Don't go and purchase the most expensive display you possibly can with the highest resolution panel if you're only rocking a GTX 1050 Ti. Because spoiler alert, it won't really work. And of course, resolution is indeed the other side of this equation, as the more pixels your screen has, the harder it is for your graphics card to actually output to. Running a game at 1080p Full HD isn't actually that difficult. 1440p and ultrawide are hard but reasonable, whilst 4K, well, that's 4 times the number of pixels in Full HD, so your frame rates will be roughly 4 times lower. We do have these new scaling techniques like DLSS and FSR to help us have higher resolution panels while still keeping very high frame rates, but if you do want to play multiplayer games, then I would always choose a lower resolution at a higher frame rate any day of the week. Besides, do the math. Lower resolution panels are cheaper to buy, and then you don't need such a powerful GPU, CPU and power supply to actually drive it in the first place. The main reason to buy a high resolution display in my eyes is for screen size. Larger sizes require more pixels to look sharp, and when you're using a bigger screen, all of that detail gets shown in its full glory, and it can make your games look simply stunning. As a general rule, I'd look at 1080p for a 24-inch display, 1440p for 27 inches, and 4K for 32 inches and above, but it's not an exact science. Besides, form factors are so different now that these screen sizes only really apply to standard 16:9 widescreen displays. I mean, we've got ultrawides, super ultrawides, I don't know, gaming TVs posing as monitors. There are so many different things to choose from. Big format displays are fantastic for gamers that want to stretch back with a controller and regularly watch Netflix. Ultrawides for those that want to do a bit more multitasking and have increased immersion, while super ultrawides actually replicate 2 16:9 monitors sandwiched together, all without a bezel. The thing that really separates one monitor from another though is the type of panel that each one uses. This will not only affect the colours and contrast of the display, but exactly how much motion blur and smearing each monitor will have whilst gaming. Each panel type comes with a series of pros and cons, so there isn't really a best per se, but the most common display types into 2024 are VA, IPS and OLED. Now, VA, or vertical alignment monitors, tend to blend fantastic contrast and refresh rates with affordability. They're great options for those that watch a lot of movies or video content and play games that are perhaps a little bit slower in pace. This is because the main drawback is that they're actually pretty prone to something that we call smearing, where fast-moving images leave behind this horrible dark mess. Some monitors are definitely better than others, but it is a common trend with VA panels. If you've already been doing a little bit of shopping around yourself, then you've probably noticed that the most common panel these days is IPS, or in-plane switching. IPS panels usually have stupendous colour reproduction, high refresh rates, amazing viewing angles and decent response times, but they are prone to something known as IPS glow. This is where several parts of the monitor will appear as distracting light blotches when viewed in dark environments. And it's also worth noting that cheaper IPS panels can struggle to get anywhere near as dark as VA panels in the first place, glow or no glow. Oh, ignore me for a second, my back is killing me. I've been sitting in this chair for far too long. But I'm still here to tell you about the newest technology around the block, OLED. And you've probably heard of this, it's popular in a load of TVs as it has been really for the last sort of 10 years or so, but now it's making its way to monitors, and bar maybe one pretty big flaw, it pretty much is the best monitor technology out there. OLED stands for Organic Light Emitting Diode, and these displays work by emitting their own light source, which means that every single pixel can shut off entirely for completely black blacks, and technically infinite contrast. Not only this, but the displays usually have the best colour reproduction, are more power efficient, and crucially have much faster response times. This means that fast images won't have that horrible smearing found on some VA panels, nor the motion blur or glow from IPS. In fact, I've actually found that a 240Hz OLED actually looks very similar to a 360Hz IPS display, all because that motion blur is significantly better. However, don't go thinking that these things are perfect though, as the drawbacks are pretty much twofold. Firstly, cost. They ain't cheap, as you're looking at well over £500 minimum for an OLED monitor. And secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, they're prone to something we call burn-in. Burn-in is where you have an image retained on screen after using it for several years, and it's caused by static elements like logos or taskbars. Now, as far as I know, I'm yet to experience any of this on any of my displays. I've got an OLED monitor and an OLED TV, but just because I've not seen it, I'm not specifically looking for it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And especially if you're going to use your display for a lot of work, like spreadsheets all day, if you're an accountant by day, gamer by night, then chances are the risk is perhaps a little bit too high. Now, the final panel type to note is called TN, or Twisted Pneumatic, and thankfully we don't really see these panels very often anymore, as the tech is quite old and outdated. The strength of TN is that they're pretty cheap to produce, and naturally have faster response times than both VA and IPS. But unfortunately they do suffer from subpar viewing angles and questionable image quality that firmly demotes them to hardcore gamers on a budget only these days. Let's talk properly about lag though, as this is probably the single most important aspect of a gaming display, and it is measured in a few different ways. What most people think about is end-to-end system latency, from when you click the mouse to actually seeing something happen on screen. This is the sum of all aspects of your setup, with everything including your PC, display and peripherals. Whenever we're talking about gaming monitors though, we're mainly talking about two main metrics: the input lag and the response time. Input lag is the time it takes for the monitor to receive your signal and then actually display it on screen. Response times, on the other hand, are a measure of exactly how long it takes for a pixel to fully change from one colour to another. And this doesn't really affect the feel or the lag of the system, but as discussed, the amount of motion blur that you're going to see on screen. Another thing to keep an eye out for is HDR, or High Dynamic Range displays. And assuming everything's working properly, top tip, grab Windows 11, don't use Windows 10 because it can be a little bit funny. Assuming everything's working properly, then an HDR signal, when displayed properly, is going to have better contrast, could have a higher brightness, much better colour, and the overall image is going to have a lot more pop to it and overall look a whole lot better. OLED displays arguably do the best job at HDR, thanks to their infinite contrast ratio, per pixel level dimming system to avoid halos and blooming, and lack of any backlight. But any monitor can display HDR that has a zone dimming system. It's pretty simple really. The higher the number of zones, the better the image will be, as smaller sections of the picture can be set to bright or dark. If you're serious about HDR, then ideally look for a mini LED display, if not going OLED, as you have plenty of zones and usually a high peak and sustained brightness. Do note though that not all games actually support HDR, and a lot of these cheaper HDR monitors will say that they are HDR, but unless they're actually rated as display HDR 600 or higher, then the end result will probably look a little bit flat and it won't really be worth buying at all. I mean, it might be for SDR, but not for HDR. And while we're on the topic of looking a little bit flat, a quick word on panel coatings. Oh, I'm sounding like a right nerd here, aren't I? You wanted to just find out what's good for gaming, and we're talking about panel coatings. But it's important. So yes, nerdy hats on everyone for a second, because panel coatings can be either matte or glossy, and short story short, glossy panels can look better in ideal conditions with more contrasty, punchy and vibrant characteristics, but of course can give off awful reflections when you put them near a window or other bright light sources. Matte panels meanwhile get around this problem with a non-reflective coating, but some monitors take this a little bit too far with a grainy moire that can hamper the overall experience, especially when viewing white backgrounds. And then finally, before we move on to the recommendations, do also be aware of variable refresh rate technology. Perhaps more commonly known as both Gsync and Freesync, these monitors accept a variable refresh rate signal from your gaming rig and then matches the display refresh to your in-game refresh rate. This reduces the stutter and tearing you'll see in-game and allows for a much smoother experience than playing without. In a nutshell, for the best experience, look for those rated as Gsync compatible or with AMD's Freesync Premium. But now is the time that I know you guys have been waiting for, the recommendations. But of course, do bear in mind that I haven't tested literally every single monitor, so if there's one that you want me to test or ask on, I don't know, my thoughts, whether I like it, whether I hate it, let us know down in the comment section below and we'll do our best to answer you. Let us begin with my budget gaming monitor pick, the ASUS ROG P24G2SPU. This is a 24-inch 1080p IPS display that costs roughly 150 quid. Now, it's not going to win any awards for its cutting-edge spec sheet, but it gets pretty much everything right for that all-important core gameplay experience, thanks to a 165Hz refresh rate. It's also great that it does support AMD's FreeSync, so gaming should be super smooth across the board, even if your gaming PC is starting its golden years and about to claim its pension. Just do be aware that the image quality is merely okay, and it's not going to compete with those costing a whole lot more. If you let me, I'll also throw in a budget ultra-wide option here, as I know there are some fellow wide boys like myself out there. Now, I want to be clear on this one, I have not actually used this display personally, but I have collated reviews on this, and it's definitely worth considering the Gigabyte M32U. It costs a whole lot more than ASUS G2, but it is a lot more monitor too, with a 34-inch IPS screen and a resolution of 3440 by 1440. Now, it's not quite as fast, running at a mere 144Hz, but with 92% of the DCI P3 color space covered, it'll look phenomenal and be a whole lot more immersive too. Just do be aware that this is one of the many monitors that is only rated as display HDR 400, so the HDR isn't going to melt your face off like any good, proper HDR monitor should. Now, in rather surprising news, I think we've got an interruption because our next recommendation actually comes from the proest of pros himself, Mr. TFT Central.
Thanks for having me, Marcus. You've left me a pretty broad category there, but I think that for most people, the 27-inch 1440p gaming displays they're probably going to be your best general all-round choice without breaking the bank too much. I mean, there's loads to choose from, but I think my personal pick in this category right now would probably be the Cooler Master Tempest GP27Q. The reason for that is that it's one of the few options in this size and price range that's got one of the high-end mini LED backlights. So that makes it a far better choice than the vast majority of screens in this size to handle modern HDR gaming. So it's got a nice bright display with significantly improved contrast thanks to that backlight. And along with its solid IPS panel and very good response times, it's a really good choice. It's got 165Hz refresh rate as well, and so it sits somewhere in the middle when it comes to the pricing tier for this kind of size monitor.
Moving on to our next category, we have 4K, and maybe you want this for the sharpness, maybe you have a next-gen console and you want to unlock its full potential. Well, do be aware most of them out there, even if they call themselves gaming monitors, are typically 60Hz, but in order to actually qualify for this video, it needed to do 120 or more. My initial picks for this were both the Gigabyte M32U and 28U, two very similar 4K monitors, both running at a maximum refresh rate of 144Hz and both supporting HDMI 2.1 to unlock 4K 120 on console. On the 32-inch version that we tested, the image quality was great, not only in terms of that pin-sharp resolution, but also from a rich and vibrant IPS panel that let your games sing. I think most of us will agree that we'd rather have the 32-inch version, as 4K is far more suited to a larger screen size, but unfortunately is a lot more expensive than the 27, so actually choosing between the two could be a bit of a tough decision. Moving on to a monitor I know better than any other one in this list, because it's my personal display, let's go for the best luxury ultrawide. I've been using Alienware's AW3225QD OLED monitor ever since it launched, and it is my favourite gaming monitor I have ever used. It shares the same 3440 by 1440 resolution as our budget pick, but this time it is OLED, baby. This means that you get that beautiful infinite contrast that makes any movie or game look divine, and the motion blur is as good as any you can get on an ultrawide today. It's also properly HDR, as while it's not quite as bright as some other mini LED displays on the market, the true blacks more than make up for that, and the whole thing is just incredibly comfortable to use. Of course, you do need to be aware of burn-in though, and do also be aware that the Freesync version of this is actually a fair bit cheaper, but is otherwise essentially the same, so I would strongly consider going for that one to save yourself a pretty penny. But as you guys are constantly telling me time and time again, not everyone wants to go ultrawide, others just want to go big. LG's 4.8 GQ900 came into the studio a while back, and while it was too big for me personally, as an all-round entertainment display, it was awesome. As it also uses an OLED panel, you can expect very similar contrast and image quality as its smaller siblings. But now you can really experience all of the detail that 4K resolution will bring. You can multitask for days, watch Netflix whilst gaming, and of course lean back into an extended playthrough or your favourite RPG.
I'll also add in the ASUS ROG PG27AQN here. It's a bit smaller than the LG that you tested. It's 42 inches in size, which I think is just about okay as a desktop monitor. It's an OLED panel again with 4K resolution and this time a 138Hz refresh rate. But unlike some of the screens in this kind of size, it's been built specifically as a desktop monitor. So it's got useful features like DisplayPort, standby mode, and even PC USB hub ports.
And I'll also point out that while some people hate ultrawide, others love it so much they want to take it to the next level and go for super ultrawide. I mean, there's no way around it. They are absolutely ginormous, but technically speaking, they do take up slightly less space than two monitors would. And of course, you can game on them as one giant display. I mean, don't get me wrong, this isn't going to work for every single game, both on a technical level and then like a nausea-inducing level, if that technically makes sense. But in particular, if you are going to play racing games and you want full immersion without going to VR, they are a fantastic choice. The one to go for is probably going to be the newest version of the Samsung Odyssey G9. Now, it's yet to arrive in the studio, we will be testing it hopefully very shortly, but this is 240Hz and now it is OLED, which again will bring you a whole lot less motion blur and stupendous image quality.
I had a chance to review this screen as well actually recently and found it a great performer with really good motion clarity and all the benefits of OLED that you've just talked about. I did find the built-in Smart TV operating system a bit of a pain to use, to be honest, and you had to get a few things configured correctly, like the HDR mode for instance. But once you got past that kind of initial experience, it was a really good gaming screen.
Moving on once again, I'm pleased to say that our next category is the penultimate one, and it's actually a brand new one for 2023, one that has a bit of an odd name. I'm calling it the bestest, fastest gaming monitor, as I'll now explain. My pick here is the ASUS ROG PG27AQN, a monitor that's not only 1440p, but tops out at a whopping 360Hz. The overall experience was pretty wild when I used this earlier in the year, with such a tiny amount of input lag that I've never really felt more connected to a game in my life. Now, image quality wasn't quite as good as OLED, as this instead opts for IPS, but you pair this with any esports title like Valorant or CSGO, and you're going to be a real force to be reckoned with. But here's the thing, I think most people would actually be better off going for a different kind of monitor entirely, one that's slower, but one that's OLED and only 240Hz. I mean, sure, if you can run your game at 360Hz, then a 240Hz OLED isn't technically going to be quite as good, but bearing in mind most games won't actually be drivable at these sort of refresh rates anyway, then it makes sense to go for OLED that has much better response times, contrast and image quality, because it's just going to look way better for the majority of games. Plus, the LG 27GR95QE is actually much cheaper out the gate anyway, so you're saving money for going for the better option.
I also want to add in the ASUS ROG Swift Pro PG27AQN into the mix here as well for competitive and esports gamers. It's pretty niche as a display goes. It's small, it's 24 inches in size, it's got a 1080p resolution, and it's even built around an aging TN film panel. But it is the fastest monitor we've tested to date, with a whopping 540Hz refresh rate and amazingly quick response times. It's got a native NVIDIA Gsync module in the screen, so it also supports NVIDIA's ULMB2 and their reflex latency analyzer technologies, so it's a really top-end gaming screen with all the bells and whistles that you might want.
This then, folks, leaves us firmly at the end of the road with just one topic left. My favourite, or I should say our favourite, gaming monitors. And mine is really easy, we've already spoken about it. It is that Alienware Ultrawide, but I believe Simon from TFT has a pick of his own.
Gosh, there's so many to choose from and so many different use cases, but I think I'll go with the ASUS ROG Swift PG27AQN for all that OLED goodness, at least until we get 32-inch 4K OLED monitors next year anyway.
Well then everybody, there we are. Everything you need to pick the perfect gaming monitor for you. I really hope this video has been helpful. If it has, please let us know by smashing that like button. Let us know your thoughts down in the comment section below, including your top picks. And of course, get subscribed for more monitor reviews and loads of other helpful PC gaming videos. If you do want to check out current pricing, by the way, on any of the monitors featured, you can find these all linked down below with our affiliate links, along with all the full, detailed reviews from both myself and Mr. TFT Central. And while you're down there, why not check out Elgato's Prompter? This all-in-one solution has everything you need to get started, including a USB-powered display, camera hood working with mainstream cameras and Elgato's webcams, and of course, Elgato's complete software solution. You can even get Twitch chat on the screen for the most immersive streaming experience. Learn more today with the link down below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.